morning. Good morning. Thanks for coming. This press conference is really one, there will be nothing spectacular here. This is, no, nothing spectacular. You're right. But this is more about beginning of a process of being transparent and keeping you informed. I'd like to, it gives me the opportunity to update you as we're going through the consent decree in general, and as things pop up during that process. As you know, in the consent decree, we have some things we have to have done, and there's a timetable to those things, and then there are costs. So, and it will be an ongoing process. So we want to keep you informed as we go along as to what's happening, so that you're informed and better able to communicate to the people who look at your venues for information. As I've said before, the agreement, consent decree agreement, was negotiated. It was a historic agreement to begin with. It was negotiated in record time. However, the reform will be transformative, with the goal of becoming part of the DNA of the Division of Police. So we want this not to just be something that we just get past, we perform certain functions, and then we're okay. We want it to be part of the DNA, just the way in which our Division of Police work, what they do every day. Working with the community and the Department of Justice, we have established a framework of real and sustainable police reform, and we are committed to getting it right. As I said, we just don't want to just do the thing and have a checklist. We want it to be something that has substance to it and that is sustainable beyond a mayor or a chief or whoever. It's just the DNA of how we police in Cleveland. The road to reform will take time, and we know we won't get to where we want to be overnight. This is an ongoing process, and some reforms can be and will occur quickly, while others will take more time. And there will be benchmarks that we are required to meet as we move forward. We are already moving forward on many fronts. Today we will highlight a few of the fronts that are underway. Now, Judge Oliver has scheduled a preliminary status conference for this Friday, June 12th. Once the judge approves the agreement, the clock will start running on a whole host of actions and policy changes that must occur within specific time frames. A lot of these time frames are short, but many of them could go up to 18 months. However, there are some things that we are already implementing, such as new training on police interaction with youth, incorporating an agreed upon changes in use of force investigative process. Other actions will also be taking place in the very near future. For example, within 30 days after the agreement is approved by Judge Oliver, I have to appoint a selection panel that will select the members of the Community Policing Commission. And this commission will be, this will be in consultation with the Department of Justice and in participation by City Council as determined by the Council President. The Community Policing Commission will consist of 13 members reflecting the diversity of our community, as well as representatives from the police unions. The members' responsibility will be to make recommendations related to community-oriented, bias-free, and transparent policing. Also, within 90 days, the City of Cleveland and the Department of Justice must together select a monitor using an open RFP process. In fact, the search for qualified candidates has already begun. The monitor's primary responsibility will be to ensure that we live up to what we have agreed to do. Now, the chief will give you a few examples of the process to date. And again, these are some of the things that we're doing even before the judge has approved the agreement, and some of the things that he'll talk about are things that are not even in the agreement, but we believe are essential and important to getting us where we need to be. Chief.
Thanks, Mayor. Good morning. As the Mayor stated, we've been in the process of not only complying with the agreement, but in moving the division forward for a long time now. I'm going to go over a couple facets of the agreement that we have to make sure we get right. It's not all encompassing. The first is community policing and problem-oriented policing. The division started a process almost a year ago now to revamp our community policing program. Prior to last year, community policing for the Division of Police was basically a Bureau of Community Policing that did programming for the division, such as DARE and GREAT and gun safety programs, gun buyback programs, neighborhood and block watch. We assisted the council people and the neighborhood clubs out there with organizing and establishing things to better protect themselves. Well, we know that we had to better that. We had to do more for our community. And we had to include every officer and not just officers within the Bureau of Community Policing. So last summer, we made contact with an organization that was actually recommended by the COPS office, a part of the Department of Justice, Virginia Center for Policing Innovations. They're out of Richmond, Virginia, and they basically do programming and technical assistance for law enforcement agencies throughout the country as it pertains to community policing and other things. So last summer we started a baseline foundational training for all officers within the division. It's a 4-hour online course that all officers are required to take. And as of 2 weeks ago, our frontline officers and supervisors have all been through that training. This basically gives our officers a starting point for community policing, because there's a lot of, not so much disagreement, but there are a lot of different philosophies on exactly what is community policing and problem-oriented policing. So we want our officers to have a foundational knowledge. So we've completed that in all 5 policing districts, and we're going to, at the end of this month, move that training to other units within the division. We also started this year with community policing as a part of our annual in-service training. So officers, in addition to the baseline training online from that organization, will also get community policing training, every officer within the division, in 2015. This is in line with our new philosophy and our model throughout the division for community policing. And our model is CPR, and it stands for community engagement, professionalism, and respect. But don't go out there and try to do a gotcha and ask one of my officers what is CPR, because they may not have been through the training yet. But that's going to be our model. That's going to be ingrained, as the mayor says, in our DNA going forward, CPR. It's all a part of our strategy to get specifically frontline officers and generally all police officers more engaged with our community. We've started an aggressive campaign to ensure foot beat patrols throughout the summer in all the neighborhoods within the city. And I'm sure some of you have already done stories on our officers walking foot patrols and engaging with business leaders and community partners, with our residents, with our youth. And we're going to ensure that continues, and we've memorialized that in our orders. Also, we are in the process of course, dissecting the consent decree with the Department of Justice. Because the things that we've started before and going forward, we have to make sure are in line with the requirements of this agreement. Bias-free policing is a huge component of this agreement. As the mayor stated, 30 days after the agreement is signed by Judge Oliver or approved by Judge Oliver, he has to start that process of appointing a nominating panel to appoint that community policing commission. Our bias-free policing is based on recommendations from that commission. But the things that we're doing now, community policing, our use of force, our search and seizure, all that ties into bias-free policing. So we'll be getting a bit of a head start, but not too far in front of that commission with things that basically tie back into bias-free policing. Our use of force and our search and seizure. Search and seizure is probably the biggest component of this agreement. It's the biggest lift for us within the division. It basically requires, I'd say, 99% of the interactions we have out there in the public to be recorded, to be analyzed, to be reviewed by supervisory officers within the division. So we're in the process, again, of dissecting this agreement and looking at each and every component and how we can start some of that process now, if able, or at least start the research into how our policies should reflect the agreement going forward. Use of force, of course, is a huge component within the agreement. There are some things that we can implement now. Use of force has a component for a FIT team, Force Investigation Team. And that team we're looking at establishing now to get them up and running, at least to review the current use of force investigations that we have throughout the division, so that when we craft that policy or revise that policy to make that more in line with the agreement, those officers have a head start on how things should work and how those investigations should flow and the requirements of those investigations, because there is an elevated level of requirement for the investigators. Crisis intervention training. We currently have a model that we think works best for the Division of Police and for this part of the country. And there are a lot of experts that have weighed in on our crisis intervention model. And one thing that came out of some of our interactions and talks with the DOJ and some of the experts that were brought in is that the Division of Police here in Cleveland is within the 15% of departments nationwide that actually have a crisis intervention training program, period. So we're ahead of the game already, and we're going to increase that as we go forward. We actually have a crisis intervention class starting tomorrow, I think it is, with the Adams Board, who does our crisis intervention training. Director Dennehan and the Adams Board have been a great partner, and they're going to be a big part of the crisis intervention component in this agreement. Right now, we currently have a little over 500 officers that are trained in crisis intervention, and my goal, our goal for the division, is to have the majority of our officers trained in crisis intervention, because it helps with everyday encounters, not just encounters with people in mental crisis. It helps with de-escalation tactics and techniques in every facet of an officer's daily job. We're working with the Adams Board to increase the number of training sessions per year. Currently, that number is about between 4 and 5, depending on the availability of the staffing for the Adams Board. We want to increase that to 6 per year, and that gets us to the majority of our officers being trained a lot sooner. And that fits within what we've agreed upon in the consent decree. Accountability, which is on everybody's radar, definitely on mine and the mayor's and this administration. We implemented approximately 4 months ago a computerized tracking system called IA Pro. And basically this system is like a database gathering system for complaints, for use of force investigations, for officers' daily interactions and activities out there. And this program allows us to take a look at individual officers. It allows us to take a look at units and districts within the division, to look at trends and dissect and analyze things that are happening based on complaints, based on use of force, and other parameters. This program allows us to set thresholds so that we have indicators that pop up when officers, districts, units reach a certain threshold as far as complaints or use of force. So we can take a closer look at that before things get to a point where we don't want them. IA Pro, along with a system called Blue Team, will allow us to do that better. And that system also ties in with our Office of Professional Standards with entering those complaints that may be lodged against officers in the field. Another thing that we've done prior to the agreement and that we've continued is our training programs for cadet officers coming into the division. As you know, the mayor tasked us probably 6 months ago with basically revamping the way we hire people for the division. With the division, with civil service, and our partners that help us in getting an officer from the testing stage to the academy to a street level officer. So we've almost completed that process, but we still have a long ways to go. As part of my mandate for my training staff, and this has been something that's been embedded in law enforcement for at least as long as I've been a police officer, for over 20 years. In the past, our training has been along the lines of a warrior mentality. And by that I mean our officers have been trained to survive, to be prepared, to basically go out within our neighborhoods and be like what we would assume to be in the military, to basically protect and be vigilant and things like that. And we want our officers to be safe, we want our officers to be vigilant, we want our officers to be able to protect our community, but we've changed that philosophy from a warrior community to a guardian community. And that's more in line with the things that are going forward now in this country. And to be a guardian, you have to do the things I've talked about with community policing. You have to know your community, you have to care about your community, and you have to be engaged with your community. So we started that process last year. So now our training staff within the Cleveland Division of Police Academy basically instills in all of our new cadets, we are guardians of this community, and we're a part of this community. There are some other things that we're doing going forward. The mayor mentioned a youth training program that we're going to start next week. It's with a company out of Massachusetts, and they basically are going to set up a train-the-trainer program to better equip our officers to deal with youth in our community. And in this program, we're including officers from the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. We're including officers from RTA, from Cuyahoga Community College Police, and also from CMHA Police Department, because these are our partners within the city, and we all deal with the same populations. And this training basically gives officers, and there's a component that has them actually interact with youth in our community, an understanding of how each group functions and the reasons behind a lot of the decisions and the actions that each group takes, so that we can come to some consensus and understanding on some of the things that happen out there on the streets and have better outcomes on both sides. So our youth understand our officers and the things that they have to do to keep our community safe, to be guardians of our community. And our officers understand some of the things our young people do in response to officers' actions and why they do that. So if we understand each other, then we're able to deal with each other and have better outcomes. That program is going to start next week. We hope by the end of the year that we have 100 officers within the division trained, 100 frontline officers, and we'll continue that program as we go. But as stated earlier, these are just some of the things that we're doing. These aren't bombshells, as the mayor said, but we're moving forward to try to make sure that we do everything possible up front so that this agreement is successful. Thank you.
As the chief said, and I said, these aren't the bombshells, but these are the nuts and bolts of how do you implement, how do you execute the spirit of the agreement, and without doing this, and we would not be able to actually have a substantive and sustainable outcome. We could check all the boxes, but that's not what we want to do. We want to have something that's sustainable as we move forward. And as we move forward, we'll be transparent and are committed to providing regular updates throughout the process, not only to the court through the monitor, as we are required to do, but also just as important, if not more important, to you and to the community. We're going to go about doing this in a way that really demonstrates how the reforms, so as we do things, you should be able to see something. You may not be able to see a lot of stuff happening at once, because you reach, for lack of a better term, a critical mass, and then things begin to become more obvious. But we want to be able to keep you updated on the little things, the nuts and bolts of things, so you can see how we're progressing. It is about providing not just police reform, but really providing a foundation for a much broader approach to how do we develop quality of life in our neighborhoods and with the people of the city of Cleveland. As you know, many of the things that police officers face they face because of other conditions that are more social economic, and they then are faced with having to deal with whatever the outcome of that disparity is. So as we're doing the training and the education, the familiarity, we also want to be able to address those other things that are not part of the consent decree, that really, in our opinion, will have a great impact not only in the reduction of crime, but in the reduction of negative interaction with police and civilians. As we travel down this road of reform, we will continue to engage with our residents, civil rights organizations, activists, clergy, student groups, businesses, philanthropic groups, and the Division of Police unions, and elected officials and other parts of the community, as well as yourself. And our goal, again, is to create a strong and safe community for both the citizens and the police, and to meet an expectation higher than what is that we already have. If we're going to be successful here, we cannot have an expectation that this is good enough. It has to be higher than what we already have, and the outcomes have to be greater than what we already produced. But that will take time. It will take some commitment and dedication. It will take some resources, and it will take us operating as we do when we're always successful, operating as a community. So any questions you have?
Yes. Chief Williams, could you describe the difficulty in trying to adjust officers' self-image from warrior to guardian? I mean, that's a pretty dramatic shift.
Well, Tom, all of this is a shift. Some more dramatic than others for our officers. But the officers I talk to day in and day out are ready for that shift. The officers that you see out there at the Cavs games and at events around the city and just day-to-day interactions have a positive attitude and know that things are changing and things have to change. So for me, it's just talking to our officers day-to-day like I do, and making sure they ensure that we do these things out there on the streets and make sure they understand the reasoning behind it. And again, for the most part, the officers I talk to, they understand it. They're embracing the change, although people are apprehensive about change. But our officers, I think, are ready for it, and you could probably poll police chiefs across the country. I think their officers are ready for it also.
Chief, what plans have you put in place or are considering to move CIT from beyond training? I know you had mentioned you'd like to get everyone in the department training, but as you know, most of the departments that are doing this very successfully have moved beyond training. So what are you going to do there?
Well, the training is the first step. I mean, our officers go through a 40-hour training course with the Adams Board. That's more, again, than 85% of the police departments in this country. And our program incorporates people from the mental health profession. As we go forward, the plan is to have those professionals available to respond with our officers to these calls for people in crisis. That's kind of the model you're talking about, but our model is a little different. We want all our officers to be trained because, again, there are components within crisis intervention training that officers can use in everything. Officers can use when they're working part-time. Officers can use just in interactions off the job with their families, because there are de-escalation techniques, there are active listening techniques, there are a lot of things that officers are trained on. So it makes for a better police department overall, not just interactions with people in mental crisis. But our model is to have every officer trained, or almost every officer, and to have a response component from the mental health community along with our officers.
And if I can add, the other model, this was a topic of conversation for some time with the Department of Justice. This other model is that you develop a response team of people who are trained in crisis intervention, and that's who you use. That's who you train. Our model, as the chief mentioned, is to just train everybody with the basics, and then have it part of their in-service training, continuing training each year, like to update them. But to almost civilianize the actual crisis itself, so that we are partners with civilians who are professionals to come in and handle that, and then we take a second seat. It's not that the police will leave or EMS will leave. What it will be is that the civilians then will then take charge of that event. The vast majority of calls for people who are in some crisis intervention are not around crime. A lot of it is family stuff that's going on, or things that may be happening in the street where there's no crime that's been committed, but people just call the police. And so when the police gets there, we want to be able, if it escalates, we want, and need be, we want civilians to come, professionals to come to deal with that, and then we serve as a backup, rather than the primary thing. Because what do? They take people to jail, or they take them to a mental place, and they resist. And then you wind up having an incident. So what we would like is to have more civilians involved. So that, and then what happens, as the chief says, that civilian will help to de-escalate the situation, because they're not the police. But even when our police go out and they're interacting with someone, and it might not be a crisis intervention, but it's an interaction with someone, they're trained in de-escalation. So it's just better for us to train everybody in the basic, give them ongoing training each year, but have civilian professionals deal with the real crisis intervention that are not around crime. They're really around having a crisis. And that's where that's the state. That's where we want to be at the end of it. Yes, sir.
Yes, Mayor, do we have a sense as to how much money needs to be budgeted for this consent decree, and where the funding will be coming from?
No, we don't have an exact amount. Our process now is looking at all of the components of the consent decree. What is the timetable in terms of implementing or executing on those components? And then what is the cost? We're in the process of doing that now. We haven't completely figured out, but it will be some millions of dollars. A lot of that cost will be covered by the city, since it will be our operation, but there are probably other costs that the private sector and the philanthropic community would be willing to help support, that are not part of operation. It's not paying for personnel. It's not overtime or operation kind of stuff. It may be training. It may be, and don't quote me on this because I haven't done the ask yet. Okay, so don't quote me. But it may be the monitor. It may be technology. It may be all those kinds of things. No. Let's get through this, and then we'll get to that. Yes, ma'am. Then here, and then here.
Well, I was going to ask about the budget, then I was going to ask about some of your rights. But how, when you say it's going to cost millions of dollars, how many millions of dollars?
As I just said, we don't know that yet. But that entire cost, it is our belief that the entire cost will not be borne by the city. That we have community partners. Well, the business community and philanthropic community who have expressed willingness to be supportive of that.
It will still cost the city a lot.
It's
How do
gonna
you
cost
plan
money.
to pay for that?
Well, how do I balance a budget every year? Is the trick, is what you do, and it's what we have to figure out, and that's why it's important for us to calculate what that is, what part we'll bear, what part others will bear, and then we'll figure it out. Because I'm not closing up rec centers to pay for this. I'm not going to stop picking up trash to pay for it. We're going to have to figure it out. But just as we've gone through the greatest recession in decades, and we figured it out. Just as we lost tens of millions of dollars in state revenues that for no other reason other than they wanted to balance their budget, we figured it out. And so we'll just have to figure it out. But we'll figure it out. Because we will maintain a level of service in the city of Cleveland. We'll maintain the snow will be plowed, trash will be picked up, recreation centers will be open, and we will fill potholes too, by the way.
That wasn't my question. Mayor, I know you and the chief are monitoring other cities that had DOJ settlements implemented, and some of those cities have seen crime stats increase. How big of a concern is that for you that this is the right fix or maybe it isn't the right fix?
Well, that's a very good question because it really gets to the what's not on the table, which really should be on the table. It's a great question. And because that is not a police issue. Crime, police is not the sole determiner or the resolution of crime. The main issue around crime are social and economic conditions and a lack of trust and confidence in the system. So when you combine those three things, you will have an escalation of crime if you don't fix those, even though you have reform in the police department. What the reform would do is have a better interaction, but it's not the solution. The solution is much broader. The solution is much broader than just reform in the police department. We have to look at, just as maybe this was the question you were going to ask around Tamir Rice, just like you have a group of people now talking about bypassing the system on the prosecution of two police officers. Why are they doing it? They don't have confidence. Now, that's one thing. The other thing probably is they do like your cameras, but at the basis of that, the average person on the street will share that notion because they lack the confidence. And that's a major issue, that you don't have confidence in the system to address legitimate grievance. So that's a legitimate issue. And if you don't have that confidence, then you're going to have some people challenging the system and challenging through criminal activity. If you have people who don't share in prosperity, share in ability to have careers or jobs or businesses so they can take care of themselves or their families, and they don't have a stake in the process, or they don't have a stake in the system, what do they care about it? So it's a criminal activities is where they go. If you don't have people who feel as if they can make a difference and grieve government in a way, you're going to have this. So are we concerned about crime? Yes, we are. But if you notice in Cleveland, our anticipation and our expectation, you will not see that increase. Why? Because we're going to work on multiple fronts. So as you know, our whole education program deals with that issue. Our whole community benefits program are creating a more equitable opportunity for access to and for wealth and jobs and stuff is part of that solution. So we want to deal with these other solutions that are not part of the Department of Justice findings or specific with police, but they're essential if in fact we want a safe, strong community and we want a community where crime is reduced because just doing this reform will not reduce crime. This is about how do you interact with people. This is all this is about. It is not a crime reduction reform. That's not what this is. This is about interaction. Crime reduction reform means reform of the system in other ways that are not directly associated with this. But you're absolutely right. It is the key to whether or not you will see a difference. Now, you'll see a difference in terms of how we interact. You'll see that. But in terms of crime itself, that's a different question of which the Department of Justice has not dealt with, let me put it that way. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, since you're talking so much about going above and beyond the consent decree and bias-free policing is such a large part of the consent decree, will you be lending support to the racial profiling ordinance that's been introduced by Councilman Zone?
Well, it all depends on what it says. I know that he is talking to my law director, and they're working together on some language, but that language has to be in alignment with what the consent decree said. It can't be an ordinance that doesn't align. So, because, look, bias-free policing incorporates not doing racial profiling. Now, is there profiling that occurs? Yes, but it's profiling crime. So you profile crime, and that's where you deploy resources and personnel to deal with that because you profiled it, right? But racial profiling and bias-free policing are one and the same. So we just have to make sure that they align and they align properly. And then one final point on the question that you asked about rising crime. One of the things that I'll be talking to the business community, philanthropic community about is not only the helping of funding the reform, but also how does the business and the philanthropic community create a better environment to address social and economic disparity, which is key to on the crime issue, not the interaction issue. And now we go back to.
Yeah, what I'm wondering, Mayor, is in the wake of the citizens group that has come forward, what's your position on this?
My position is I think I'm pretty clear. We referred that to the county sheriff, who has now referred it to the county prosecutor. And so I'm going to respect the process. Now, in saying that, I'm doing this because we have other things to do other than just the moment. Because we have disciplinary actions we have to look at and review based on not only the East Cleveland shooting, but once the Tamir Rice decision has been made one way or another, we have disciplinary. And so I don't want to prejudice that. I don't want to bias that. I don't want to have conversations that would shortcut a process that we had to deal with in order to guarantee due process, even though arbitrators overturn it anyway, but it's not because we don't do the right thing, right? So I want to, now, but even after I've said that, I'm not going to talk about Tamir Rice and the action of this group who wants to bypass the prosecutor. But I think I've been very clear from the beginning of this when I asked the Department of Justice to come in that I don't think that they've gone far enough. I don't think that they've gone far enough in actually looking at a much broader issue of pattern of practice of constitutional violation in the criminal justice system, and that they're too narrowly focused on just police. So I think I've been on record of saying that. It's not like it's nothing new. So so you can, but in terms of the Tamir Rice case, and that we've engaged in the process, is now in the county prosecutor's hand, and that's where we're going. But in terms of what the real need for reform so that people have confidence in the system, because one thing I know is that if you're fair and you're honest about it, even if people don't agree with the outcome and they be mad at the outcome, they will accept the process and generally be okay. But if they don't believe in the process and they think the process is flawed or biased, then you're going to have a problem. I don't care what the outcome is, they're going to have a problem with it. And so what I'm trying to do, and what we have done so all the time, is that we're focused on a fair process. Whether people like what I decide or like the conclusion of what we do, it is fair and it is equitable. And that we hold people accountable where need be, and we don't throw people under the bus when they haven't done anything wrong. So I want to stay focused on the process. Now, once all that's over with, then we can have another conversation about things. But I've been on record, and I will continue to be on record, that this needs to be, rather than being so narrowly focused on police, to deal with the interaction with the police and the public, it needs to have a broader review of whether or not there's a pattern and practice of constitutional violation in the criminal justice system as a whole. And I maintain that, and I've said it from the beginning, and I'll continue to say it.
Mr. Mayor and perhaps Chief, Mr. Lucas, the head of the CPPA, has some fairly critical public comments about certain aspects of the consent decree, suggesting that there may be difficulty getting buy-in from his membership. Do you have any thoughts about that? And are you worried about getting buy-in if he is in fact the face and voice of the
there will be reform in the division of police of the city of Cleveland. There will be reform, and it's just that simple. And Mr. Loomis is a union representative. I mean, he has a right of his opinion, and he has a right to debate or to engage in those things that he believes is not in the interest of his members. So, but that's a conversation, and there's agreement and there's disagreement, right? But at the end of the day, there will be reform in the division of police. No matter what I say, he say, or the union heads, there will be reform.
There will be reform within the Cleveland Division of Police. Steve and I have talked, and I don't want to speak for Steve, but the conversations we've had have been along the lines of things that he may interpret as butting up against the collective bargaining agreement for his members. The agreement itself, the components that I talked about, I think we're all in favor of doing. But there are a couple things within the agreement that he, in his opinion, kind of conflict with the current collective bargaining agreement for his members. And those things that are in there, the agreement basically says that we should talk about those things, not that we have to fully implement the way it says in the agreement. But we'll talk through this entire document, and again, we will have reform. And not all 1,520 officers within the division are going to agree with everything that's in there, but they're going to be on board with what we need to do for the city.
Yes.
In regards to the independent monitor that will be hired here soon, is there any particular preference for someone from the Cleveland community, or are you opening the search nationwide?
It'll be nationwide, and whoever rises to the top. What we want is someone that is knowledgeable, that is fair, and that is really in line with what the Department of Justice and the city has agreed on in spirit, that we want reform. And again, you can, some of this stuff will be check in the box, other stuff will be less identifiable, you can't quantify it, but we want a monitor that can kind of quantify those things that you don't have a quantifying kind of way of doing, if that makes sense to you.
You have a sense of how many people applied?
I do not know quite a few. If the law director is not here, but she would be able to tell you. There's been quite a few. Some local, some national. Is that it?
Well, before we go to that, off message, off topic, there's a couple thoughts on what the cabinet is.
Typical Bears.
predictable. Just a couple of walk-off thoughts on what the Cavaliers have accomplished thus far.
Well, the Cavaliers are Cleveland. They've you know, people don't expect them to do well, and they do well. They come through, they lose certain things, and people think the world is ended, but they find a way to make it happen anyway. They cobble the stuff together. I mean, they're a personification of Cleveland. You know, and as I said, and I'll wrap up with this, and I'll continue to say it, this is the defining moment for Cleveland. We will be defined by this. And as you know, in good times, when everybody's happy and stuff, that doesn't define you. Is when times are hard, there's adversity and things like that. And so this will define Cleveland. And we want Cleveland to be defined in a way that we're the model as to how you do these things, not just narrowly defined by a consent decree and a Department of Justice interpretation of what that should be, but really in a much broader sense of who we are as Cleveland. And this is, for us, is a defining moment, and that's the Cavaliers. It's a defining moment for them. Thank you very much.